My estranged mother appeared on my doorstep, claiming to be terminally ill. Spoiler alert, it's all fake. Hi everyone, I'm Ella. If you're here, maybe you're seeking stories of overcoming, of personal battles, or perhaps you're just curious about the complexities of human relationships. Well, I've got a tale that's riddled with deceit, betrayal, and the harsh realities of familial bonds that are more suffocating than supportive. I'm a 32-year-old marketing executive, and for the longest time, I prided myself on my ability to keep my personal and professional lives balanced and thriving, despite a childhood shadowed by a manipulative and emotionally absent mother, Linda. Just when I thought I had everything under control, my world was knocked off its axis, not once, but twice. First came the earth-shattering confession from Anthony, my boyfriend of 3 years, who admitted to having an affair. The pain of his betrayal was sharp, a bitter pill that left me reeling. But before I could even begin to process this, my mother, whom I hadn't seen in years, showed up on my doorstep with tears and a story about a grave illness, pleading for a place to stay. Thrown into emotional turmoil and with nowhere to hide, I found myself battling old demons I thought I had long overcome. This isn't just a story about dealing with a cheating partner or a dying mother. It's about facing unexpected challenges that test your limits, about learning whom you can really trust, and about figuring out if you can ever truly escape your past. So, as I share my journey, maybe you'll see bits of your own struggles in mine, or maybe you'll find the strength to face your own crises. Either way, I hope my story resonates with you as I navigate through this storm, trying to find my footing again. The evening started like any other, with Anthony and I sharing a quiet dinner at our apartment. I had no idea that my world was about to be turned upside down. As we were clearing the dishes, Anthony became unusually quiet, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a tense, distant look. "Ella, we need to talk," he finally said, avoiding eye contact as we settled onto the couch. The seriousness in his voice instantly set off alarm bells in my head. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he continued, his voice faltering. "I've been seeing someone else." The words hit me like a physical blow. My first reaction was disbelief, then a crushing wave of betrayal. "How long?" I managed to ask, trying to steady my voice. "Several months," Anthony confessed. "I didn't plan for it to happen, it just did. I'm so sorry, Ella." The apology sounded hollow. All those late nights he said were spent at the office, the unexplained absences. It all made sense now. I felt foolish, blindsided, and incredibly hurt. We talked, or more accurately argued, for hours. By the end of the night, it was clear that our relationship was over. Anthony packed a bag and left, leaving me alone with the shards of our broken relationship. As I was trying to process the whirlwind of Anthony's betrayal, another storm was brewing. The very next day, as I was still reeling from the breakup, my estranged mother, Linda, appeared at my door. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling, a sight that pulled at my heartstrings, despite the years of distance between us. "Ella, I need your help," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm very sick, and I have nowhere else to go." My mind raced. Linda and I had barely spoken in years, not since I moved out and built my own life away from her manipulative tendencies. Now, here she was, claiming illness and seeking refuge, just as I was at my most vulnerable. Despite my reservations, I couldn't turn her away. I let her in, not just into my apartment, but back into my life, not fully realizing the weight of what I was taking on. That night, as Linda settled into the guest room, the reality of my situation began to sink in. My boyfriend had betrayed me, and my manipulative mother was back under the same roof, claiming she was dying. I lay in bed, feeling the walls of my carefully constructed world closing in. The following days were a blur of conflicting emotions and unwelcome adjustments. I was thrown back into the world of managing work stress while dealing with the sudden presence of Linda in my apartment. She filled the space with her needs and narratives, talking incessantly about her life, her illness, and her regrets, often leaving me emotionally drained. At work, I was handed a high-profile project that required my full attention and best performance. It was a huge opportunity, the kind that could define my career path forward. But with Linda's constant demands and the lingering pain of Anthony's betrayal, focusing became increasingly difficult. Every call from Linda during office hours, every unexpected emergency she concocted, pulled me further from my professional persona into personal chaos. Meanwhile, Linda's illness became the center of our interactions. She had a doctor's note and prescriptions that seemed to verify her story, but something didn't sit right with me. The timing was too convenient, her symptoms too vague. Driven by a mix of concern and growing suspicion, I contacted her doctor directly under the guise of helping manage her care. What I learned only deepened my suspicions. The doctor was surprised to hear about the severity Linda described, noting that her condition shouldn't require such an extreme level of care. Feeling betrayed once again, I confronted Linda that evening. "I spoke to your doctor today," I started, watching her carefully. "He seemed to think your condition isn't as dire as you've described." Linda's face fell for a moment before she masked her expression with one of confusion. "Oh, he must have misunderstood. It's really quite bad, Ella. I need you." The conversation quickly escalated. "I need honesty, Mom," I pressed, my voice firm despite the shaking I felt inside. "Are you truly sick, or is this just another manipulation?" Linda erupted, accusing me of being ungrateful and cold. "After everything I've done for you," she cried, a well-rehearsed line that had once kept me bound to her side out of guilt and obligation. This confrontation opened old wounds and confirmed my worst fears about letting Linda back into my life. Yet, it also strengthened my resolve to set boundaries. I insisted that if she were to stay, it would be on my terms, with transparency and respect for my space and rules. Reluctantly, she agreed, but the atmosphere became charged with tension, a silent war of wills between us. The strain at home inevitably bled into my work life. I started making small errors, missing details I would normally catch. My boss took notice and called me into his office one morning. "Ella, this isn't like you," he said, concern etched across his face. "I know you're going through a tough time, but you need to get it together or take a step back from this project." His words were a wake-up call. I realized I was risking not just my personal peace, but my professional reputation and achievements. I needed to compartmentalize my personal issues during work hours, a feat easier said than done. That night, I sat down with Linda and laid out my ground rules. I need to be able to focus on my job. That means no interruptions during work unless it's a real emergency. "Can you do that?" I asked, more a demand than a question. Linda nodded, seemingly compliant, but the glint of displeasure in her eyes was unmistakable. We reached a fragile truce, the balance of power subtly shifting as I reclaimed some control. However, the ongoing tension, the unresolved issues from our past, and the ever-present doubt about her illness lingered, a storm cloud over our uneasy coexistence. As the weeks passed, the initial truce I had brokered with Linda began to fray. Despite her promises, the lines between a true emergency and her need for attention remained blurred. Each day brought new challenges as I struggled to maintain the boundaries I had set, often feeling like a parent to my own mother, managing her crises while trying to keep my career on track. Amidst this ongoing struggle, my doubts about Linda's illness gnawed at me. Her behavior was increasingly erratic, oscillating between apparent frailty and surprising sprightliness, which did not align with her claims of a debilitating condition. My suspicions, once a whisper, grew into a chorus that I could no longer ignore. Determined to uncover the truth, I took a day off work to follow Linda after one of her many mysterious appointments she claimed were medical visits. To my astonishment, she did not go to any clinic but met with old friends for lunch, looking lively and healthier than she claimed to be any day at home. Watching her laugh and chatter animatedly, a cold realization settled over me. Her illness, a critical factor that she used to wedge herself back into my life, was likely a fabrication. Confrontation was inevitable. That evening, with the evidence of her deceit clear in my mind, I waited for Linda to return. When she did, still buoyed by her day out, I confronted her directly. "Linda, where were you today?" I asked, the moment she stepped in. She hesitated, a flicker of panic crossing her features. I had a doctor's appointment." "I followed you today, Mom. You weren't at any doctor's office. You were at the cafe downtown, looking perfectly healthy," I stated flatly, watching her closely. The walls came down then, and with them, Linda's facade. She burst into tears, a mixture of guilt and defiance in her eyes. I needed to come home, Ella. I had nowhere else to go, and I knew you wouldn't take me in unless you had to," she sobbed, her confession tumbling out amidst gasps for air. The revelation hit hard. The deceit was deeper and more personal than I had feared. She admitted that her financial recklessness had left her destitute, and that faking an illness seemed like her only ticket to stability and company, my company. "I didn't think it would go this far," Linda whimpered, her voice a mix of regret and desperation. "But once I started, I didn't know how to stop without losing you again." Her words, meant to elicit sympathy, only fueled my anger. Betrayed once more by the person who was supposed to nurture and protect me, I felt a bitter resentment. The emotional turmoil of the past weeks, the strain on my job, and the erosion of my peace, all were consequences of a lie I had unwittingly harbored. "Linda, you need to leave," I said, my voice cold, more decisive than I felt. "I can't trust you, and I can't help you if every interaction is built on deceit." The fallout was painful. Linda left the next day, her departure a relief, but also a deep, aching wound. I was free from the immediate chaos she brought into my life, yet the emotional residue of her manipulation lingered, tainting my view of trust and family. In the aftermath, my work suffered further. Though I had removed the immediate distraction, the stress and betrayal had taken a significant toll. My focus waned, and my project teetered on the edge of failure. My boss, though sympathetic to my personal crises, was visibly disappointed, and my professional reputation, once stellar, now hung in balance. As I sat alone in my apartment, now quieter and emptier than ever, the weight of loneliness and disillusionment was palpable. The unraveling of lies had left a void, filled only by the echo of my fractured relationships and a haunting question: how do you rebuild when the foundations of trust are so thoroughly shaken? The silence of the apartment in the aftermath of Linda's departure was both a solace and a stark reminder of my solitude. I threw myself into my work, attempting to salvage my project and my professional reputation. However, the damage from the past months had taken its toll, and my attempts to regain control seemed increasingly futile. As the deadline loomed, my team and I worked late into the nights, but the cohesion and synergy we once had were noticeably absent. My leadership, once confident and decisive, was now marred by second-guessing and a palpable tension that my colleagues could sense. Despite my best efforts, the project was critically behind schedule, and the quality of our output was not up to the standard I or the company expected. The culmination of these issues came one disastrous Monday morning when a critical presentation to stakeholders went awry. Technical difficulties, coupled with gaps in our data analysis, led to a humiliating debacle. The room was filled with dissatisfied murmurs and disapproving glances, and I stood at the forefront, the focal point of the failure. My boss, who had been supportive but increasingly concerned, called me into his office later that day. The conversation we had was grave and uncomfortable. "Ella, I know you've been dealing with a lot personally," he began, his tone sympathetic yet firm. "But we can't let that affect our work to this extent. I'm afraid we need to take you off this project." Being removed from the project felt like a professional exile, a public acknowledgement of my failure. The impact on my career was immediate and devastating. Colleagues who once respected me now whispered behind closed backs, and I felt a growing isolation at work, a social sidelining that mirrored my personal life. Amidst this professional upheaval, Anthony reached out. He called one evening, his voice tentative over the phone. "Ella, I've been thinking about us, about everything that happened. I made a mistake," he confessed. "I miss you, and I was wondering if we could meet, talk things over." I agreed to meet him, driven by a mix of lingering affection and a desperate need for any semblance of reconciliation. We met at a quiet cafe, the same one where we'd celebrated several anniversaries. The familiarity of the setting contrasted sharply with the strangeness between us. As we talked, Anthony expressed his regret, his desire to make amends. However, the conversation took a turn when he admitted that Linda had influenced his decision to leave. "She told me about her illness, how she needed you," Anthony explained. "She suggested that stepping back would be best for you, to give you space to care for her." The revelation that Linda had meddled so directly in our relationship was a new betrayal. It wasn't just the lie about her illness. She had actively worked to dismantle my life's stability. Anger, sharp and bitter, welled up inside me. "Anthony, I can't do this," I said, standing up from the table. "Too much has happened. Too much has been broken." Leaving him there, I walked away, feeling a mix of liberation and profound sorrow. The final thread connecting me to my old life had been severed. Returning home, I was met with the empty echoes of my apartment. The isolation I felt was complete. Professional failure, personal betrayal, and the severance of my most meaningful relationships had left me adrift. As I looked around the silent space, the realization that I was truly alone, abandoned by those I had loved and trusted, settled over me with a crushing weight. The future loomed uncertain, a path shrouded in the fog of my disillusionment and sorrow. In the following days, the depth of my solitude and the scale of my betrayals seemed to magnify. The apartment was no longer a home, but a reminder of everything I had lost: relationships, trust, and a piece of myself. My thoughts frequently wandered to the past, questioning every choice that led me to this stark present. The first step towards my new reality was recognizing that staying in my current job and living space was untenable. Every corner of the city, every aspect of my work, was tainted with memories and whispers of failure. I needed a fresh start, somewhere far from the shadows that haunted me. I began applying for jobs in other cities with a relentless focus. It was not just a search for new employment, but a bid for escape, a way to outrun the ghosts that seemed to lurk in every familiar place. When a job offer finally came from a company in a distant city, I accepted without hesitation. The position was a step down from the career highs I had once aimed for, but it offered a chance at redemption and rebuilding. Packing up my life into boxes felt symbolic, each item a chapter of my story I was eager to close. As I folded away photo albums, gifts from Anthony, and mementos from a life that was no longer mine, I felt a mix of sorrow and cathartic release. The day I left, the city was shrouded in a dense fog, as if mirroring my own uncertain path forward. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. There was no one left to bid farewell. Driving away, I watched through the rearview mirror as the skyline faded, a chapter ending in the silent solitude of my departure. Arriving in my new city brought a sense of anonymity that was both frightening and exhilarating. Here, no one knew my failures or the scandals that had upended my life. I was just another face in the crowd, and there was comfort in that obscurity. Settling into my new job, I threw myself into work with a determined zeal. My new colleagues were welcoming, but I kept them at arm's length. The lessons of my past were etched deeply, trust a currency I was no longer willing to spend freely. I built a reputation as reliable and hardworking, but distant. Invitations to social events were politely declined. Personal questions were deflected with a professional smile. My personal life was marked by a similar withdrawal. Evenings were spent in the quiet of my modest apartment, far smaller and less grand than the one I had left behind. Books and work filled my hours, a safe refuge from the complexities of relationships. The only calls I answered were from work. The only emails I read were professional. Family, friends, love. These were chapters I had closed, their endings written in betrayal and pain. As months turned into a year, my new routine solidified into a life of solitude. Promotions came, recognition at work grew, but the accolades felt hollow. Success, once a shared celebration, was now a solitary acknowledgement of my exile from deeper human connections. One evening, standing on my balcony overlooking the bustling city, I realized the cost of my newfound stability. The skyline was beautiful, a tapestry of lights and life, yet I stood apart from it, an observer never quite part of the scene. I had escaped the pain and chaos of my past, but at what cost? The bitter resolution of my journey was clear. In seeking to protect myself from further betrayal, I had abandoned not just those who hurt me, but the possibility of ever trusting again. The freedom I had gained was lined with an isolation that was as much my own doing as a consequence of others' betrayals. In that quiet moment, as the city hummed below, I wondered if the fortress I had built around my heart was protection or imprisonment. The answer, like the night air, was cold and unclear, a whisper lost in the vastness of a life rebuilt on the ruins of trust.